So, here comes the second walkthrough episode on reading fill in the blanks, just as I talked about in previous videos. I have a few more questions that I'd like to discuss to do this question type justice. It has so many things to look out for, and even more neat applications of the tips and tricks that I just had to demonstrate them more using more sample questions. This time, I'll shamelessly skip the briefing section that I usually do for every video and jump straight to the questions. If you need some clarifications on anything about reading fill in the blanks, be sure to check out the previous walkthrough episode and the Crash Course series. Not only did I talk about what you should and shouldn't do at length, but we also had a lot of practice questions to get you started. So without further ado, let's jump right in and start with the first question of today. I gotta tell you, I didn't really understand what Dow Jones really is. I just occasionally hear Donald Trump bring it up during conversations to boast his success as the president because he quote-unquote fixed the economy. After this question, however, I actually learned a thing or two about what it actually is, which is kind of an extra motivation for you guys to treat practice more seriously. You get to pick up interesting and sometimes useful knowledge here or there. Back to the question. Let's go through the procedure to tackling this question recommended by yours truly. You go through the blanks and determine what kinds of a word you need, and then you go through the word list to see what parts of speech the words have. Lastly, it should become very simple to see that some words can only fit into some blanks, and with minimal interpretation and reading comprehension, along with some basic logic, you should be able to get most of the blanks right. Let's do that right now. The first blank is right after tends to. Well, the important part is the preposition to, which can either function as a regular preposition or it can set up an infinitive. In this case, the first blank is followed by the state, which is referring to the condition, not the country. Whichever the case it might be, state is used as a noun here, and the fact that you have a determiner the at the front, you can't put an adjective into the first blank. Therefore, the only possibility here for you is to have an infinitive, so you're looking for a verb in its original form. Easy clap. What about the second blank? It comes after the word would, which is an auxiliary verb to support a tense. You don't really need to know what exact tense it is. All you really need here is the knowledge that a predicate needs more than just auxiliary verbs. So you're also looking for a verb in its original form. You don't have other auxiliary verbs like be or have, so it cannot be continuous, perfect, or passive. Moving on to the third blank, we can see that it is led by the word only and is followed by the word companies. Here, only might be an adjective or an adverb, but the fact that companies is a noun, you should come straight to the conclusion that you need an adjective, because there's no place for a determiner. If there were to be a determiner, it would be in front of only. The third blank is quite straightforward, but the fourth blank is quite a bit more difficult. Here we have another case that the blank seems to be removable and the sentence structure would still hold. We brought this up before that this situation calls for an adverb, but as we'll find out later on, we don't have one in the pool. In this case, what else can go there? The answer is an adjective, and for this particular structure, it is very common to have a present or past part. This kinda goes back to how both present and past parts can go in front of a preposition. Here are two examples. The man waiting for the train gets annoyed by the delay, and the celebrity surrounded by bodyguards walked into the room. The official explanation is that both waiting and surrounded are being used as adjectives, so they go in front of the prepositions. A similar case using a pure adjective might be something like, you clicked on this video eager to learn more about reading fill in the blanks. Here, there's no dispute on the fact that eager is an adjective, so this argument extends to past and present parts, which already had the functionality to go in place of an adjective. This, however, is probably not the best way to explain things, and it makes it difficult to see why there can be a dangling adjective all by itself, like what we have for the fourth blank. Here's my understanding. For all these aforementioned examples, you can pretty much assume that there is an invisible that is, or who is, or some variants with different tenses in front of the present or past part. Put them in and you'll see that the sentence structure will still make perfect sense, and it's just a simplification on the clauses. This is also the case for the fourth blank. It would make total sense for you to put back in the invisible that are in front of the blank, and you can figure out right away that you need something that functions like an adjective or a present or past part to complete the tense. Let's go through the word pool quickly. Expressed and represented are past parts because we don't need past tenses. Lead can be a verb or a noun if you pronounce it as led, but it's probably safe to assume that we're not looking for a heavy metal for any of the blanks. Average can either be a noun or an adjective, but we don't need a noun, so it's an adjective. And the same goes for industrial, which you should be able to tell from the suffix. Distort and reflect are both verbs. Remember the awesome rule? 2 syllables, stress on the second syllable. Both of these clues indicate that the words are very likely verbs. We can look at the first and second blanks together because they require the same part of speech and there are 3 viable options in the pool: lead, distort, and reflect. If you know anything about what distort means, you can eliminate it right away. Distort means to change the shape of something, especially to change away from its original or natural state. Neither the state of the stock market nor you seem to be things that can be distorted, so it's out of the question. Then all you have to do is to see that you probably can't be reflected, so reflect goes in the first blank, and lead goes to the second blank. Easy 2 points out of 4 already. The third blank is also a giveaway in the sense that it is very easy. If you pay attention to how the sentence is structured, it mentions the name of DJIA, which is literally what the I stands for, industrial. Bottom line, anyone should be able to make this deduction, or else you might need to test for something other than English proficiency. As for the last blank, it should be quite obvious that average doesn't really fit, so you're down to the past parts expressed and represented. Here, represented is the correct option because express means to convey a message using words or gesture, and oftentimes it is linked to emotions. There you go, easy first question. The second question is also quite moderate in difficulty. Here we go. You see how much Pearson loves the Olympic Games? Here is another one, albeit about the more modern event held in Athens. Looking at the first blank, you have a past tense of are in front of it, which suggests a few options like an adjective, a noun, or another verb either as a present part or a past part. In this case, however, you can make one more bold assumption. Given the fact that it is followed by the preposition by, it is very likely for the first blank to be a past part, because it is the most common configuration for a passive voice, like A was done by B, where you can substitute done for pretty much any past part. It's not 100% true for all the cases, but it should be an inclination for you to consider. The second blank is another infinitive, and everything afterwards makes up a full prepositional phrase, so we need a plural noun for the second blank. The third blank is also the same, with the clue here being were. Here, however, you need to be a little careful. Participation is technically a noun, but since you have were, it cannot be the noun. Whatever you fit into the third blank, it has to form a noun phrase with participation attached at the front. It needs to be plural, and it needs to be something that can break. Quite a few requirements you need to fulfill, but this will be very handy for the process of elimination later on. The fourth blank uses a common structure as X as Y. The most representative phrase would probably be as soon as possible, but it doesn't have to be strictly like this one. The X can either be an adverb like soon, or it can be an adjective or a determiner. Y can be used as a parallel word to X, or it can even be a full clause. For this question, we only have to think about the X here, and since we don't have any adverbs in the list, the X will have to be an adjective, along with participles that can be used as adjectives. Looking at the first word in the pool, compelling is probably a present part instead of a gerund. Not all INGs can serve as both a present part and a gerund, and the best way to determine which one a word should be is probably by looking at its meaning. Besides, you have the noun form compulsion already, so rarely is compelling used as a noun, if ever. The same can be said about upsetting, which is also a present part. Venues, records, and formats are all plural nouns, which we do need quite a few for the blanks. One thing to note, records might be a singular verb, but it's not something we need for any of the blanks, so it's a noun. Lastly, we have marred and concluded, both of which would not be past tenses, so they can only be past parts. Along with our analysis for the first blank, one of them should probably be the correct answer. After quickly going through the first sentence, the event ended as a surprising success. Since the sentence begins with while, you should figure out that you're probably looking for something with a negative tone. Concluded is more or less neutral, so marred is the correct pick. The word means to disfigure or impair the appearance of something, to negatively affect the quality, which fits the context very well. Let's go through the second and third blanks together as they both need a plural noun. It might be easier to see that you need records for the third blank for all the reasons we talked about. You need a plural noun, something that goes with participation, and something that can be broken. Going back to the second blank, you're down to venues and formats. Assuming you don't know what a venue is, you should know what a format is, and completing a format doesn't seem like a very common expression. A venue is a place where an event or activity is being carried out, which fits our context for the Athens Olympic Games. Lastly, the fourth blank makes us choose between compelling and upsetting. Apart from the first half of the first sentence, everything in the passage gives off quite a positive tone, so upsetting doesn't seem to be the right pick. The correct answer here is compelling, meeting our expectation that a present part can be used as an adjective. I think it's time for us to up the challenge, don't you think? Here comes a more difficult question, not really in the sense that the words are really obscure or the passage is impossible to understand, but the fact that our techniques are somewhat restricted or even nullified due to how this question is set up. Let's take a look and see what we can do. Typical length for a passage, typical amount of words in the pool, so what's the problem? Well, going through the passage, you will find out that all of the blanks are looking for an adjective. What's worse is the fact that all of the words in the pool are also adjectives. This means that our techniques on analyzing the parts of speech no longer work, which is quite a shame because it is indeed very powerful. In this case, we have to rely more on reading comprehension as well as our knowledge on expressions and common phrases. Also, for this particular question, it is even more important than the ones we previously discussed for you to understand the word definitions. So let's start with that. The first word is ultimate, which has the meaning of final, last, or the greatest extent. It also has some connections to the level of power, as this is a common word used to describe the most powerful character abilities in video games. The second word is variable, which is sometimes used as a noun in a mathematical context. Here, however, we only need adjectives, so we will adopt its corresponding definition of being able to vary. This is a common way to understand the words ending with the suffix "-ble", which is in fact directly evolved from the word able. Here are some examples. Questionable, being able to raise some questions, so it means that you are suspicious or doubtful about something. Reasonable, being able to reason, which as a verb means to argue and make sense of something with logic. Here comes two more examples, which just happen to be in the pool. Flexible, being able to flex, and flex means to stretch or change shape. Considerable, being able to be considered. So this word means that something is quite significant that you have to factor it into your consideration. A little segue. If you have watched my previous videos, I have been using the saying flexing my capabilities or prowess. It came from the phrase flexing your muscle, which is something all of us can imagine, like some muscular man showing off his biceps. That's a flex, or a show off of what you can do, oftentimes unnecessarily and not asked for. It's these kinds of little pieces of info that ultimately, see what I did there? Build up to form a well-rounded foundation for English on which you begin to learn new stuff very easily using the things you already know. It's a tedious process to amount to this final level, and trust me, it was very painful at times for me, but it's a journey worth taking, and I hope that all of you can reach there soon enough. Back to the question. The third word is analytical with the suffix "-cal". This suffix usually means related to something, so this word precisely means related to analyses, which is a word you should definitely know. Same goes for theoretical, meaning related to theory. Not too difficult to understand, which kinda makes this question a little more manageable. Lastly, we have decisive with the suffix "-if". The suffix means having a tendency or nature to ... which can be quite weird to comprehend at first. Let's use decisive as an example. Firstly, you should know what decide is, and then you will combine it with the suffix to form the meaning having a tendency to decide. Decisive is sometimes used loosely as a synonym for important, which is quite understandable. Another quick example. If I say someone is active, that person is likely to be moving around, which fits the definition having a tendency to act. Now is the time to match the words with the blanks. It might be easier for us to start with the second blank because we're specifically looking for a type of skill, and the word itself has to be quite specific since it is parallel to problem solving. The only fitting word in the pool for these criteria is analytical. Every other word seems to be quite generic or not really a kind of skill, so they're incorrect. Another relatively easy one to figure out and to explain will probably be the fourth blank. It has a bunch of text right after it to explain what message the word has to convey. The clues personalize, and a wide range of electives suggest that the fourth blank has to be a word that means capable of changing, so only flexible fits the description. We have two more blanks to tackle. The first blank requires an adjective that describes the word knowledge, but the whole knowledge term is in parallel with the upcoming skills term. If we know anything about skills, especially problem-solving skills, it's the fact that they are more about doing things. Is there a word about, well, not doing things? It seems like theoretical fits the bill, and theoretical knowledge is a relatively common expression, so it is indeed the correct answer. Looking at the third blank, it is an adjective that describes the word qualification, which I would assume comes with the final exam or getting a certificate, both of which should happen at the end of your studying. In that case, we might want to look for a word that means final or last, and we can immediately see that ultimate is the most suitable pick here. And that's it. It's really not that difficult, and it prepares us for the later reading and writing filling the blanks, for which the parts of speech technique is almost always not applicable. Here's our final question, and it's also more dependent on the passage and words themselves instead of techniques. This is potentially one of the hardest questions for reading filling the blanks that you can expect. For the 5 blanks, you need a noun for all of them, and surprise surprise, all words in the pool are nouns. The only blank that's somewhat different from the others is the first blank because it's the only one that doesn't have an article at the front. If that's something within your repertoire, then you can start distinguishing the countable and non-countable nouns, which is easier said than done. The one word that I truly consider as non-countable is insistence, and everything else seems to have a plural variant. Therefore, your best bet is to put insistence into the first blank, and that is indeed the correct answer. The next observation you might have is the fact that all 5 blanks belong to separate terms in a parallelism, even though you don't really have a conjunction in this case, but the structure should be quite obvious. Knowing that, it's only natural for us to quickly determine whether each parallel term is good or bad, generally speaking. The first term has the word intellectual, sounds like a smart word, so it's positive. The second term has the phrases tradition and authority and infallible sources of truth, which might need some understanding on what enlightenment is for you to correctly come to the conclusion that it is negative. Or you can just say that you hate authority and reach the same conclusion. It works. The third term just has 2 words, and if you don't understand them, then it's going to be impossible to determine its nature. Bigotry has similar meanings to bias and prejudice, with an emphasis on rejecting people simply because they hold different opinions. Persecution means to be hostile against others, especially due to differences in race, politics, or beliefs. Knowing their definitions, you should be able to see that the third blank also needs a negative word. The fourth and fifth blanks seem to be quite good, and indeed they are positive. After this analysis, you can then figure out that only 2 words in the pool are distinctly negative, while other words are somewhat neutral or even positive. In that case, dislike and rejection should go to these blanks, but which one goes where? The best explanation I can give is the fact that dislike is more emotional and personal rather than factual, so it fits bigotry and persecution better. Thus, rejection goes to the second blank, and a rejection of something as the infallible source of truth is something you can understand, apart from maybe the word infallible, which means can't be wrong. Even without knowing that, you can just ignore this because it's an adjective, so nothing much is really lost. You reject the idea that one thing is the absolute source of truth, which is something more than just you not liking it, but completely disagreeing. Moving on to the fourth blank, one clue here we can utilize is the preposition to right after it. Usually, you would have for proposal, on for thought, and in for belief. Is this set in stone? Most likely not. You can probably find many counterexamples on how these prepositions are paired with these words, but largely speaking, these patterns still hold. that really just leaves you with commitment and conclusion. And by now you should be able to see that free inquiry is really not a conclusion to anything, so commitment is the pick here, and it also nicely works with the preposition to. We're down to the last blank. This time we don't have a preposition, and instead we have a conjunction, that. Yes, here that is a conjunction, but it doesn't really matter what you call it, because grammar is mostly not a part of the discussion here. The main reason I brought this up is to point out the fact that the fifth blank is linked to knowledge is power. In fact, whatever you put into the fifth blank has to be the same nature as knowledge is power. That makes things quite a bit easier, does it not? I would say that knowledge is power is not really a proposal or a conclusion. Then you're down to thought and belief, which I will argue that belief is the correct pick here because it's the word that contains a deeper and more sophisticated meaning. It is somewhat similar to thought, but you can certainly agree that belief is more complex and layered, so it's the better choice here. How about that? We did it! We survived through some of the hardest questions for reading filling the blanks. However, don't get too cocky because whatever difficult analysis we had today will pale in comparison with some of the stuff we'll have to do for reading and writing filling the blanks, which is seen by most students to be significantly harder. Oh well, we live to fight another day, and as long as you guys have learned something useful, then we're on the right track to tackling even the toughest questions. Please like, subscribe, and share so that more can join in on this conversation. So Kanye dropped out from his delusional campaign run just 10 days after he announced it. Why am I not surprised? When is Donald Trump dropping out? Can't wait for that to happen, but until then, I'll see y'all next time.